Emerging Threats Hub. Shadow Wars, Crypto, Disinformation, and the Breaking of the Old Order.
What if I told you the most important front in the war in Ukraine isn't on any map you know? It's not in the Donbass, and it's not in the Black Sea. It's on blockchains. It's in the invisible architecture of the global financial system. And it's in the social media feeds of people who think they're just watching the news. Welcome to Emerging Threats Hub. I'm Sebastian. Today we are looking at a world that is quietly, but fundamentally, breaking apart. The structures that defined global stability for decades, arms control treaties, the inviolability of borders, and even the reliability of economic sanctions are fracturing. We have a packed agenda. We'll start in Ukraine, 4 years into a conflict that has redefined modern warfare. But we're going deeper than the front line. We'll investigate the shadow crypto economy that is feeding Russia's war machine, a story that exposes the fatal flaws in our current sanctions regime. Then, we shift to a terrifying milestone, the end of the New START Treaty. For the first time in 50 years, we are flying blind regarding nuclear arsenals. What does an unregulated nuclear world look like? And finally, we'll look at a story that slipped under the radar. Ireland, a country famous for its neutrality, is explicitly arming itself against Russian threats. When the neutrals start drawing lines, you know the system has shifted. This isn't just a news roundup. We are here to connect the dots, understand the human stakes, and most importantly, find the pathways back to stability. Let's get to work.
Ukraine and the War of Endurance.
Let's start with the epicenter, Ukraine. It has been 4 years since the full-scale invasion began, though the conflict really started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. We often get stuck in the day-to-day tactical updates, who gained a kilometer here, who lost a village there. But if we zoom out, what do we see? We see a war of endurance. Recent analysis from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, paints a stark picture. Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience. They have adapted their military doctrine, built a domestic defense industry almost from scratch, and navigated the complex web of Western aid. But resilience isn't the same as victory. The real story here isn't just the hardware. It's the shift in what this war is about. It started as a territorial grab by Russia, but it has morphed into a grinding war of attrition. And in a war of attrition, the battles aren't just fought with artillery. They are fought with economies, with will, and with technology. And this is where it gets interesting, and frankly, worrying. We like to think of sanctions as a kind of diplomatic shield. We impose them, the bad actor runs out of money, and they stop fighting. But reality is messier. A major investigation has uncovered what researchers are calling the shadow crypto economy feeding Russia's war machine. It turns out that Russia is systematically using cryptocurrency networks to bypass the very sanctions designed to stop them. They are procuring military-critical components, dual-use technology that can be used for weapons, through these decentralized channels. This is a constructivist nightmare in action. The liberal international order built a system of banks and SWIFT codes, a system based on trust and verification. But actors are now constructing a parallel reality outside that system. It's a wild west of finance where anonymity shields aggression. So, the question isn't just, how is Ukraine doing on the battlefield? The question is, can the international financial system actually enforce its own rules? If crypto allows Russia to buy components for hypersonic missiles, then the sanction regime is a sieve, not a shield. This forces us to rethink everything about how we pressure adversaries. We can't just sanction banks anymore. We have to sanction code, and we have to police the decentralized networks that dictators are exploiting. But let's look at the human element of this conflict. We often talk about territorial concessions as the price of peace. But for the people living in those territories, concession means abandoning their homes, their history, and their rights. Any path to peace has to grapple with that. It can't just be lines on a map. It has to be about security guarantees that are worth the paper they're written on, something the Budapest Memorandum failed to provide.
The invisible battlefield.
Moving from the financial shadows, let's talk about information. Realism, the old school of thought in international relations, loves to talk about tanks and missiles. It treats power as material. But as we've discussed on this show before, power is also about the ability to shape what people believe is true. A stunning report from Forbidden Stories has identified over 60 Russian agents operating a disinformation network across 3 continents. This is Prigozhin's network, the infamous troll factory. But it hasn't disappeared. It has evolved. It is now under the control of foreign intelligence services. Think about that. Even after the death of its founder, the machinery of influence continues to turn. This is a weaponization of information. It's an attempt to construct a reality where aggression is defense, where victims are aggressors, and where democratic institutions are corrupt failures. This creates a massive stability problem. When you can't agree on basic facts, diplomacy becomes almost impossible. How do you negotiate a ceasefire with an actor who is actively convincing their population, and yours, that you are the one planning a genocide? This isn't just a Russian phenomenon. We are seeing a global trend where law enforcement is becoming militarized, and democratic rights, particularly women's rights, are being targeted as foreign influence. It's a playbook. Delegitimize the free press, demonize civil society, and consolidate power by creating a state of perpetual emergency. So, what is the solution here? How do we defend the truth without censoring it? It starts with transparency. Investigations like the one exposing the 60 agents are crucial. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, but we also need digital literacy. We need to treat information hygiene with the same seriousness we treat public health. And we need platforms that prioritize veracity over engagement metrics. But there is a darker technological shift happening simultaneously. While information wars rage online, the physical tools of war are undergoing a revolution. We are seeing the rapid rise of autonomous systems. The conflict in Ukraine has become a testing ground for drones, particularly FPV, first-person view drones. These cheap, commercially available devices can destroy million-dollar tanks. It's an asymmetry that flips traditional defense economics on its head. But there's a gap. We talk a lot about offensive drones, but defense is lagging. An innovative proposal from Russia suggests using reserve combat aviation, essentially mobilizing trained reserve pilots to address the counter-drone mission. It's a practical solution to an immediate threat. However, it highlights a broader trend, the democratization of destruction. You no longer need a state budget to threaten a state. You need a credit card and a drone. This forces us to ask, what are the new norms for these weapons? We have treaties for nuclear weapons, for landmines, for chemical weapons. But we are sleepwalking into a world of autonomous killing machines without a global framework. It is another example of technology outpacing our institutions.
The collapse of frameworks.
And this brings us to the most alarming development of the week, and perhaps the year. We have officially entered uncharted nuclear territory. The New START Treaty, the last major nuclear arms control agreement between the United States and Russia, has expired. Let that sink in. For the first time since 1972, there are no bilateral constraints on the world's 2 largest nuclear arsenals. There are no on-site inspections. There is no data exchange. We are flying blind. From a realist perspective, this might look like just another shift in the balance of power. But from the principled, stability-focused view we hold here, this is a catastrophic failure of imagination. Arms control isn't about being nice to your enemy. It's about knowing that a missile test is a test, not a first strike. It's about preventing the accidental apocalypse that comes from miscalculation. Without New START, the risk of escalation intentional or accidental spikes. And we can't ignore the China factor here. China is modernizing and expanding its own nuclear arsenal. A bilateral treaty between the US and Russia leaves out a critical third player. This is the security dilemma in its purest form. The more we build weapons to feel safe, the less safe we actually become. But the collapse of frameworks isn't just happening in the diplomatic realm. It's happening in our defense industries too. You might think that in a world this dangerous, Western militaries would be firing on all cylinders to modernize. But let's look at the United States Navy. The Constellation-class frigate program, a critical project for surface warfare, is failing. It is behind schedule, over budget, and suffering from systemic issues. And it's not just the US. The British Army's Ajax armored vehicle program has been plagued by noise and vibration issues that have injured soldiers. It's still in production, but it's a mess. This is a contradiction we cannot ignore. Europe is awakening to the Russian threat. Ireland is even abandoning its historic neutrality to prepare. Canada and Denmark are signing new defense partnerships. The political will to defend the liberal order is there, but the industrial capacity to do so is faltering. It does us no good to have the will to fight if we lack the means to build the tools of deterrence. China, by contrast, is launching naval vessels at a rate that rivals the entire Western world. This isn't just about budgets. It's about state capacity and industrial policy. If the West wants to defend the rules-based order, it needs to rebuild the industrial base that sustains it.
Under the radar.
Now, for our segment, Under the Radar. We've talked about nuclear treaties and naval failures, but I want to draw your attention to a small country with a big message. Ireland. For decades, Ireland has been the definition of neutrality. It's a core part of their national identity. But a recent report shows that Ireland is now explicitly naming Russia as a threat and revamping its defense forces. Why does this matter? Because Ireland is an island nation on the edge of Europe. It's not on the front line of NATO's eastern flank. But the realization that the international environment has fundamentally changed has reached even the most neutral corners of the globe. When a country that hasn't been in a major war since the 1940s decides it needs to arm itself, it tells you that the social construct of European peace has been shattered. The shared belief that security was guaranteed is gone. This is a bellwether. It shows that the threat perception is now total. It's not just about NATO members feeling the heat. It's about the entire democratic ecosystem realizing that the rules are gone and they need to look out for themselves. It's a sad development in many ways, the loss of a peaceful identity, but it is a rational response to a world where might is increasingly making right. So, where does this leave us? We started today by looking at the shadow wars, the crypto networks funding death, the invisible armies of disinformation agents, and the silent death of treaties that kept us safe for 50 years. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. It's easy to retreat into cynicism and say, well, it's just human nature to fight. But I want to push back on that. That is the realist trap. The realist view says this chaos is inevitable. But as we've seen, this chaos is constructed. It is the result of choices to violate borders, choices to exploit financial loopholes. If the problem is constructed, then the solution can be too. We can construct new frameworks for arms control that include China. We can regulate cryptocurrency to stop it from funding genocide. We can rebuild our industrial base not just for war, but for the deterrence that prevents it. And we can invest in the truth, supporting the journalists and investigators who expose the shadow networks. The path to stability is not a mystery. It requires vigilance, it requires investment, and above all, It requires the will to believe that a better, safer world is possible. That's the news you need to know. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and I'll see you next time on Emerging Threats Hub.